Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something more addictive than your favourite midnight snack. The turbulent and twisted history of heroin. You know, the kind of history that sneaks up on you like your neighbour's cat, just waiting to ruin your evening. From a pharmaceutical's wonder drug to a full-blown national crisis, it's an opiate roller coaster that leaves you both bewildered and a bit giggly at the absurdity of it all. So before you get cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know what's keeping you up at night, hopefully not a craving for something more. Now dim those lights, crank up the fan for that soothing ambience, and nestle into your comfort zone like a burrito in a fluffy tortilla. Let's ask some fun questions together. Have you ever considered how a substance that was once meant to help people actually spiraled into chaos? Why does it seem like every time we find a cure, we accidentally create a crisis? How many people do you think ever thought they'd spend their evenings researching opiate history instead of, say, the best taco joints in town? And let's be real. If you began to feel a little too comfortable with all this knowledge, would you just float away into the sweet abyss of sleep? Or start plotting your own historical documentary? Well, congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1880, where the world is seeing heroin for the first time, and guess what? People are oddly excited about it. Buckle up, it's going to be a hilarious ride. It all began in a lab, much like a science fiction film, but with fewer explosions and more powdered substances. Picture a time when chemists thought they could cure ailments with a sprinkle of chemistry magic. Enter diacetyl morphine, otherwise known as heroin. They were sold on its potential as a wonder drug, thinking, finally, a painkiller that won't come with a side of guilt. Spoiler alert, it came with a hefty side order of consequences. In the late 19th century, the world was ablaze with scientific curiosities. Chemists were the rock stars of their day, sporting their lab coats like capes and concocting potions that promised miracles. Amid all this excitement, the ingenious minds at Bayer, a German pharmaceutical company, set their sights on morphine. They were popping corks and holding champagne toasts, convinced they could make morphine even better, like a sequel that totally outshines the original. Why not create a version that works better and is less addictive, they mused. Ah, if only that were true. Instead, in 1897, they synthesized diacetyl morphine. When it hit the market, they marketed it as the ideal cough suppressant that would help with everything from raucous throat-scratching coughs to all variations of bodily discomfort. Doctors waltzed into the examination room, waving prescription pads around like magic wands, ready to sprinkle this miracle dust, while outpatients left feeling euphorically relieved, albeit perhaps a little confused about why they suddenly craved a second helping of comfort. Imagine the scene. Patients strolled out of their doctor's office, heroin prescriptions clutched in hand like golden tickets to a world of primarily bliss. It was the dawn of a new era, but the lustrous sheen of excitement quickly dulled when the reality of addiction began knocking at the door like an unwanted relative. One minute you're sneezing and struggling with bronchial angst. The next you're fending off hopeless cravings with the sweet embrace of diacetyl morphine. But hey, there's always a bright side, right? At least for a while, heroin was embraced amidst the swirling smoke of Victorian norms, where pain and social discomfort were just a pesky pit stop on the road to suburban bliss. Patients told their friends about their new life hack, and the trend spiraled through society like an exhilarating roller coaster, with more loops than a plot twist in a soap opera. Alas, this high-speed ride would soon hit a snag. Enter the early 20th century, when scientists began to notice that the once guilty pleasure of heroin turned into a full-blown addiction, like an Italian grandmother persistently insisting you have just one more slice of pie. "What's wrong with you?" they demanded of the patients. "Why can't you just stop?" Unbeknownst to them, those helpless souls were already ensnared in the sticky web of dependence, desperately longing to escape while hiding their sorrow behind a facade of social niceties. The real kicker? The pharmaceutical giants of the time seemed utterly shocked as patients became increasingly despondent when prescription after prescription failed to provide a way out. Cue the government, who spotted an emerging crisis like hawks swooping down upon unsuspecting prey. Enter stage left the world of regulation, where heroes and villains blurred as policymakers hustled to tame this beast they unknowingly helped unleash. In a jaw-dropping twist, lawmakers roller-coasted through the rapid changes, desperately seeking ways to regain control, much like trying to corral a bunch of feral kittens into a box with a flashy red ribbon. Prohibition rode in on a white horse, promising a swift end to the party. Heroin was officially made illegal, outlawed faster than you'd realise that your high school gym teacher didn't really have your best interests at heart. Yet, the more restrictive the laws became, the more intriguing heroin appeared to those outside the law. It transformed into a mythic figure, a forbidden fruit glimmering with promises of euphoric escapism. It was like a pop-up carnival in a dull suburb, where everyone knew it was just a few blocks away but knew better than to ride the Ferris wheel, while still hoping that someone else took that leap of faith. And thus, we find ourselves spiralling back to the beginning. A substance initially conceived to be a cure became an unwitting heroine of chaos. The irony hung in the air like a thick fog, a swirling contradiction that dared to ask, when does medicine become madness? The birth of diacetyl morphine wasn't just a medical breakthrough. It was a cautionary tale, a turbulent narrative that set the stage for the habits and trials we grapple with today. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and get ready for the laughter and chaos that comes next on this wild ride through history. Fast forward to the marketing department, where ideas sprout like weeds. Imagine a Victorian-era pitch meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, let's label this magical substance as a cure-all. We'll have grandmothers peddling it in the streets like it's the next big spice blend. If only they had known that it would soon take a swift turn toward the dark side. Welcome to the wildly misleading world of pharmaceutical marketing, where everything sounds too good to be true, and it almost always is. Picture the scene, a room filled with tie-clad gentlemen, their moustaches twirling like they just inhaled a whiff of success. The air smells of too much tobacco and misplaced confidence. There they are, throwing around marketing buzzwords that feel like sugar-coated nonsense. Heroin is non-addictive, they proclaim as if they just found a treasure map. Brought to you by the same people who brought you aspirin, it's like the magic elixir of life. The allure of making money off this newly discovered wonder drug put everyone in a dizzying state of excitement. And who could blame them? In a world where medical knowledge was scarcely more reliable than a roulette wheel, what could go wrong? Well, quite a bit, as it turns out. With a wink and a nod, heroin began its glamorous debut on the stage of medicine. It was advertised as the miracle solution for everything from coughing fits to anxiety, a one-stop shop for all of life's ills. Imagine ads plastered everywhere. Feeling anxious? Heroin. Coughing? Heroin. Mildly inconvenienced? You guessed it. Heroin to the rescue. And suddenly, people who just needed some cough syrup were being handed what could only be described as the equivalent of a sledgehammer, turning their everyday discomforts into completely extraordinary experiences. Now let's take a moment to visualize those hearty, easy-to-sell claims circulating around town like a prized recipe at a potluck. People began consuming heroin through various avenues, sipping it or taking it with a chaser, just like that cure-all tonic their grandmas swore by. Never mind that they were essentially signing themselves up for a raucous ride down the rabbit hole of addiction. No one saw it coming, and even if a few eyebrows raised, they were swiftly quashed under the heavy foot of marketing allure. Like Aunt Edna at Thanksgiving when she insists the cranberry sauce is the best part of the turkey. Spoiler alert, it's not. And yet, while the marketing department congratulated itself over champagne and cheap cigars, real-world consequences began to tiptoe into view like an uninvited guest at a wedding. People started waking up with a nagging sensation that couldn't be washed away as easily as their previous ailments. Their lives began to unravel like a sweater snagged on a particularly vicious nail. Users could have predicted they were in for a wild ride when their cup runneth over with cravings and side effects that made the initial thrill seem like nothing more than a cruel jest. Fast forward again. What could possibly make this situation even more absurd? Enter stage left. Addiction. Suddenly, this once lauded miracle drug was crashing down to the earth like Icarus flying too close to the sun. Those advertising wins turned into cries of despair as families grappled with loved ones submerged in a war with addiction. People were not just using heroin, they were warding off the walls of their collapsing lives while trying to keep up appearances, and that's when the marketing hype turned to crisis mode. But don't worry, marketing geniuses just pivoted. They crafted new narratives, whispering things like, "Available now, heroin's new BFF. Methadone, the more socially acceptable cousin." Because what's better than addiction? Why, just another substance to manage the chaos. If this sounds ridiculous, well, welcome to the bizarre comedy of errors that is the world of pharmaceuticals and addiction. In the end, what started as an innocuous concept of healthcare became an unintentional cautionary tale. The bright advertisements and bumbling pitches faded away, revealing the grit, despair, and lifelong battles that plagued countless families. Real lives were altered in ways that couldn't be bottled up, marketed, or easily sold back with a refund policy. So, as you settle in, it becomes clear that in a world driven by profit motives and dreamy declarations, it's almost as if the universe decided that a good old-fashioned dose of irony was the main ingredient in this bittersweet concoction. One that turned a miracle into a crisis, brought to you by marketing teams that never saw what was coming. Because really, isn't history just a never-ending cycle of disaster disguised as opportunity? And just like that, America discovers its newest obsession. Suddenly everyone seems to want a taste of this miracle, but instead of finding relief, many found themselves on a one-way trip to addiction. It's the classical case of what could possibly go wrong. Well, how about your entire life? Turns out the journey from wonder drug to addiction is as slippery as an eel wearing a tuxedo. As doctors eagerly dispensed this wonder drug, like they were handing out candy at a parade, folks began to embrace the euphoric highs that came with it. And oh boy, did they embrace it. Like a long-lost cousin who shows up at the family reunion just to borrow money. For many, the initial effects of heroin felt like the world had just opened a window to a sun-drenched paradise. Pain melted away like ice cream on a hot summer day. At first, they couldn't get enough. Picture the scene. Friends sharing stories of their miraculous turns of fortune, sitting on wooden stoops like old-timey philosophers, bragging about their newfound bliss. I popped one of those little beauties, and suddenly I was walking on clouds. I didn't even feel my back pain anymore. But little did they know, that cloud was about to rain down a torrential storm of regret. As the enthusiasm spread, so did the sobering reality of addiction. What had seemed like a gentle embrace of relaxation soon evolved into an insatiable hunger that swallowed lives whole. One day you're enjoying a picnic in the park, and the next you're hiding in the shadows, scrambling for your next fix like a raccoon rummaging through a garbage can. The glamour of first-time usage faded faster than the bright colours of your favourite childhood toy, replaced instead by a grim cycle of desperation. Socio-economic factors didn't spare anyone either. Heroin didn't discriminate. It snaked its way through every corner of society. From high-powered executives in shiny suits to factory workers on the night shift, it became the common thread in the tapestry of devastation. Imagine CEOs whispering over their mahogany desks, wondering how the stock market could fall while they fled into drug-induced oblivion. We need to discuss the quarterly numbers, but first, let's have a little pick-me-up. As the term junkie became the badge of shame, families found themselves in a precarious balancing act. The disillusionment weighed heavily. How could this happen? Mothers wept as they tried to reconcile their child's descent from straight A student to a shadow lurking in abandoned houses. This transformation was so rapid, it felt like a tragic magic trick gone completely awry. Stealing lives instead of pulling rabbits from hats. Cities became battlegrounds as desperation set in. Crime rates surged. Partly because when people are hungry for their next fix, morals become more flexible than a yoga instructor at a retreat. Burglary, theft. There was no line too treacherous to cross. Life turned into a complete farce, as unsuspecting citizens tried to take their evening strolls, only to be caught amidst a showdown worthy of a B-movie script. An unexpected duel between a thief and a crusading neighbour desperately trying to protect their garden gnomes. Intervention programs sprouted up to combat the chaos, but as they often do, more complex issues arose. Is it compassion or control? Debates swirled, mimicking the dizzying highs and lows of addiction itself. People gathered in community centres, sharing their struggles and stories in circles that had more tears than laughter. Counsellors worked tirelessly, trying to piece lives back together like a jigsaw puzzle that got tossed around like a football. Judgment reigned supreme. Public opinion danced on the edge of compassion and scorn, as it often does. They brought this onto themselves, some would say, while others pleaded for understanding. Families swung between loving support and harsh reality checks like a pendulum, whose string had frayed beyond repair. As whispers of reform floated through society, an air of hope emerged. Little did anyone realise they were only scratching the surface of a deeper epidemic, a dark tide of pain and suffering that would continue to ripple through history. Thus, the story of America's first junkies set the stage for unforeseen consequences that would shape policy, public opinion, and medical practice for generations. It's a harsh lesson in how quickly the lines between a miracle cure and a nightmare can blur, and it raises one critical question still begged today. How do we learn to navigate the treacherous waters of obsession while finding our way back to shore? The answer perhaps requires a collective stitch of care, compassion, and commitment to avoid falling back into the abyss again. As addiction gripped the nation, the government got a little twitchy. Cue the politicians fumbling to regain control over a substance that spiraled like a roller coaster. Let's create some regulations, they said, while simultaneously wondering if they'd need an opiate recovery program of their own. Prepare for a tug-of-war between lawmakers and users, with everyone trying to figure out who gets to control the potion that suddenly became the sorcerer's stone of addiction. As the pendulum swung wildly, it was like watching a game of political whack-a-mole. Every time they thought they nailed one issue, another one popped up, ready to bite them on the behind. Let's talk enforcement, shall we? Picture it. Lawmakers drafting laws in a smoke-filled room. Okay, maybe not literally. Trying to craft a potion of their own to counteract addiction's wicked charm. They scratched their heads, scribbled notes that looked more like doodles than legal statutes, and held hearings that often turned into theatrical performances, complete with gasps and exaggerated gestures worthy of the finest duck hospital, as they uttered phrases like public safety and moral obligation. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. As they debated, users, who were just trying to navigate their chaotic lives, were left in the dust. And then, like a magician revealing a rabbit from a hat, The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act appeared in 1914 to save the day, or so they thought. This legislation attempted to regulate and tax the production and distribution of opiates, thinking that if they could just put a sticker on it, everything would magically go back to normal. Sure, this might sound rational, until you realise that trying to control addiction with taxes is about as effective as using a colander to catch rainwater. Spoiler alert, not happening. The underground economy of drugs simply morphed into an even murkier mess. The supply and demand continued to reign supreme in the underbelly of society. Picture a teetering tower of dominoes wobbling precariously as public health crises began to stack up like unfortunate excuses at a family reunion. Reported addictions soared, as the law was now trying to play catch-up while society grappled with the fallout. And instead of national cheers for solutions, what we got was Morse code for confusion. Short-term fixes lead to long-term horrors. That's right. While lawmakers painted pretty pictures in their closed-door meetings, real-life consequences brewed outside like a sinister witch's cauldron. As the whirlwind grew, law enforcement began doing what it often does best, cracking down on users while somehow missing the big-picture glimmers lurking in the shadows of addiction. Enter the police raids and the incessant headlines that screamed, "Another bust!" But here's what no one was asking. Would a heavy-handed approach of mounting arrest really carry society forward? It was like trying to shove a dozen clowns into a clown car and expecting them all to get along. Spoiler alert, it's messy. Meanwhile, local communities became battle zones of stigma and misunderstanding. Neighbourhoods cried out for help while their leaders grappled with how to respond without pointing fingers. Lawmakers, seemingly oblivious, continued to whip out regulation after regulation, like they were adding punchlines to a comedy routine. You could practically hear them rehearsing, "Let's just ban it!" because nothing says solution like pretending a pesky problem doesn't exist. But in the midst of the chaos, something magical happened. Activist groups emerged, such as the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, not with swords drawn, but armed with ideas and compassion. They began spreading messages of education, prevention, and rehab, slowly turning the tide from criminalisation to understanding. Imagine a kaleidoscope slowly transforming from dark, fractured glass to a bright, coherent picture full of hope. They pushed back against the tide of regulation, reminding everyone that addiction could be a health issue, not just a criminal one, and therein lies the bleaker comedy. As solutions emerged, the government was finally forced to pivot. From the disastrous war on drugs approach to an acknowledgement that prevention and treatment needed to be part of the recovery equation. It wasn't smooth sailing, not by a long shot, but it marked a shift that began to unravel the tightly woven narratives that addicts are just naughty children who deserve reprimanding. Somewhere amidst all this, there's a lesson wrapped in the absurdity. Rules without true understanding often land us in a space where solutions become another kind of trap. As the political drama unfolded like a Shakespearean farce, it really should have reminded people of something simple. Keeping people healthy makes for a society that's, well, healthier. As the dust began to settle from the regulatory flurry, it became less about combative stances and more about harnessing compassion amidst chaos. So the battle for control continued, and as we shuffled through this historical farce, one thing became clear. While the government was busy drawing lines and crafting regulations, life on the ground persisted, and laughter didn't disappear. It merely carved out space within the complexities of human existence. It's the ultimate family squabble. Morphine, the old reliable cousin, versus heroin, the flashy newcomer with a flair for the dramatic. Whose virtues will outweigh the vices? Whose advice is worth taking? Spoiler alert, one of them is destined for the cocktail party of addiction, and the other is stuck in the mud with a civil war of conscience. Morphine, after all, had been the go-to painkiller for doctors since it was discovered by Friedrich Wilhelm Serturner in the early 1800s. It's like that uncle who always plays it safe. Everyone trusts him with the family BBQ and the Sunday roast. Morphine was the cured for many ailments. Physicians hailed it as the holy grail for everything from post-surgery pain to chronic illnesses. And here we have heroin, entering the scene like a rock star with a megaphone, promising all the relief of morphine but faster and cheaper. Who doesn't love a good bargain? Just imagine this. An opiate that can give you that euphoric high, while also, removing your ability to ever resist the temptation of second helpings at family gatherings. It was marketed by the Bayer Company in the late 19th century as a cough suppressant. Yes, they're positioning heroin as the healthy choice for your next cold. Just a spoonful of heroin helps the cough go down. Of course, the only thing it truly helps is addiction, but who's counting? The sales pitch gleamed with optimism, and suddenly the world was hooked, figuratively and literally, as fate would have it that shiny coating would quickly tarnish. While morphine made a name for itself as the tender provider of relief, heroin unveiled a darker ticket to the underbelly of human experience. What started as a friend to soldiers and the sick turned into literal back-alley brawling, over which opiate would reign supreme. And oh, the irony. Morphine had its struggles too. Many users found they became dependent on its gentler embrace, which led it to a struggle with addiction quite similar to that of heroin. It's like watching two relatives argue over who caused more drama at Thanksgiving dinner. Both are buried up to their neck in the stuffing of addiction. However, while morphine hung on to a thread of legitimacy, heroin wore its villain crown like a tiara, turning it into the choice for those craving a rock and roll lifestyle. But let's go deeper into this family feud. Picture morphine, precious and revered, nestled safely in a doctor's bag, applied like a soft woolen blanket over aches that need tending. Then pops up heroin, hitching a ride from the underbelly of urban grit. It screams, why be content with mere relief when you could live life on the edge? The allure attracted artists, poets and innovators like moths to a flame. But as you flick through history, the tales often burned a little too bright, leading to tragic endings that echoed across the pages of time. As the 20th century progressed, the schism grew and government agencies began to notice. Morphine, with its long history of medical use, was deemed a necessary evil, while heroin was starting to get kicked from the dinner table like an unruly teenager. Experts began to weigh in on the acceptable opiate. Laws were put into place that tried to distinguish usage, morphine as a hospital staple, while heroin was sliding toward being the poster child for public enemy number one. Heroin's seductive reputation became coupled with terms like junkie and addict, while morphine retained a facade, much like a family member who quietly copes with their melancholy over cocktails. And like every sibling rivalry, the truth lies somewhere in the ridiculous, but you didn't hear it from us. Fast forward to the present day, where heroin's dark reign creates ongoing battles on streets littered with both broken dreams and shattered lives. It has evolved into a cultural phenomenon as society wrestles, while dealing with the realities of addiction, treatment, and the quest for understanding behind the stigmas. Meanwhile, morphine remains the reliable older sibling, present at every family gathering, despite the fact that a few aunts whisper, that stuff can really mess you up too. Ultimately, in the great sibling rivalry of morphine versus heroin, lessons abound. It's a narrative filled with both comedy and pain, revealing humanity's complex dance with addiction across time. The turmoil surrounding these substances teaches us about the delicate balance of desire and responsibility, and how ultimately society may be a bit addicted to chaos. Because let's face it, even in the muck of addiction and collective strife, there's always a hint of comedic irony woven into the fabric of our frantic history. It seems the cure for addiction was sometimes found in what we now politely refer to as questionable institutes. Cue the dirty linens, flickering lamps and crawling insects as we explore the asylum era. Who knew that being treated for addiction would feel like a vacation at a haunted hotel? Through dubious methods, hospitals remedied patients that would only leave more addicted than ever, usually with a side of rejection from society. It was as if one day a group of Victorian gentlemen gathered, adjusted their top hats and said, "What if we made recovery feel more like a twisted board game? So let's set the scene. Picture yourself strutting into one of these places, filled with the crisp odour of disinfectant that's definitely older than your grandmother, but still somehow manages to smell like dirty socks. The walls are painted a calming shade of institutional beige, almost as if they were trying too hard to mask the disarray lurking within. You'd enter thinking, at least it's quieter than megachurch on a Sunday. To your dismay, you soon discover that the incessant hum of madness beneath the surface is more like a raucous symphony played on rusty spoons. With the charm of a medieval dungeon, these asylums were often run by well-meaning if slightly bewildered staff members who might have more experience handling sheep than human beings. Their treatment techniques range from the innovative, like ice baths that would freeze your sense of time, to the bizarre, like the time they thought it was a good idea to administer lobotomy light, comprehensively misunderstanding what chop it off truly meant. Want some therapy? How about a loud shout into the void? Or better yet, spending quality time alongside patients who weren't there for an annual retreat, but for serious heartbreaking issues. Let's not forget the treatments that involve the joys of isolation. You'd find yourself locked in a room that looks more like a storage unit than a place for healing, complete with chipped paint and vague murmurings echoing from the corridor. Is that a crying patient or just the wind? You'd wonder. Careful not to touch anything too sticky, possibly left over from an earlier bout of effective treatment, which often misfired spectacularly. Somewhere in between chains and serums, they whipped up comfort foods that could only be described as revolutionary disasters. Imagine oatmeal that had experienced more traumatic events than the average soap opera character. And let's discuss the meals. Picture a tray of grey sludge that may or may not have once been something resembling food. Items swiftly dubbed mystery protein would greet you, lounging on a plate like a game show contestant waiting for their turn to be eliminated. Who could eat here with confidence? The sad irony, of course, was that patients entered these facilities seeking a cure, only to be muddled into a state of addiction à la crème, implying a heavy layer of sorrow topped with a sprinkle of irony. Interestingly, the allure of recovery seemed to fade faster than candy at a kid's birthday party. Once the euphoric misconceptions of treatment crashed down like a toddler in full tantrum mode, many patients walked out with a new lease on addiction rather than sanity. "Welcome back," friends and family would say, only to recoil in shock at the mere sight of them, resembling a spectre that just stumbled out of an Edgar Allan Poe poem. The rest of society had very little sympathy for these returnees. After all, addiction was still closely tied to stigma, and wandering the streets looking worse than the day you came in would hardly earn you any brownie points. This misadventure in healing serves as a cautionary tale, an awkward dance between the desperate need for care and the malpractice that thrived in the shadows. It was evidence that in the quest to heal, we often stumble into more chaotic tangents than even the wildest imagination could conjure. And while these asylums hoped to restore sanity, what they truly provided were warped lessons about human nature and the need for understanding, compassion, and a solid dinner plan. So, as we brush off the cobwebs of this dark chapter in history, it's clear that addiction treatment wasn't simply an episode of bad decisions. but rather a cautionary tale highlighting the complexities of addiction and a reminder of how far we've come, or, in some cases, how little we've learned. The Asylum Chronicles leave us pondering what constitutes true healing and how we might better navigate the tangled roots of recovery today. Because even through laughter and unease, we can't forget the relentless spirit attempting to break free from the clutches of its own chaotic historical narrative. As the psychedelic waves of the 1960s rolled in, so did a new wave of heroin use. A music festival on every corner and an untamed spirit meant the darker side of the rainbow reared its head. Cue emotional anarchy as artists and dreamers grappled with addiction while still believing in love and peace. And don't forget, the darker side often lurks just below the surface of every jam session. Imagine the scene: flower children twirling, colours bursting, and a whole lot of people befuddled by everything except their budding addiction to heroin. Forget about a spirit of community. The looming spectre of addiction shattered what could have been harmonious. Now, let's set the stage. Picture a bustling San Francisco, the streets flooded with tie-dye, incense and the sweet sound of guitars. But lurking behind that joyous veneer was the unsettling reality. The drug of choice for many was no longer just cannabis or the occasional trip into acid land. Oh no, people now sought the comforting yet dangerous embrace of heroin, thinking, why not combine a nice high with an even worse low? It was as if society collectively decided to turn its back on peace and love in favour of an addiction and despair package deal that included guilt as a free add-on. After all, nothing said, I'm a product of the counterculture, quite like a liver-ravaging substance slowly inching its way into the hide of your personality. Meanwhile, the artists who made it all happen, those lyrical, poetical wanderers armed with guitars and good intentions, were battling their own demons. The music scene flourished, but it came at a cost. The very same creativity that fueled legendary songs seemed to sit back with a smirk, knowing full well it would be the tragic end for many of its most brilliant stars. Think of Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, all icons who penned their struggles beneath colourful euphemisms of love and joy. They would totter on this fine line of brilliance only to fall victim to the very vices they sometimes seemed to glorify. Ever encountered a drug dealer who parlayed their goods in a peace sign-shaped booth? You might if you were a wee bit unlucky. The flower children ventured into a realm where dealers began using creativity to lure customers in with flowery language instead of nightmares behind closed doors. Don't you want to touch the stars? They'd ask, as if the magic herb would float you gently into a rainbow-glazed dream. But those dreams were hinged on an addiction that wrapped around their minds and hearts like ivy on an old stone wall, lethal yet hypnotically beautiful. The irony isn't lost on us, as the backdrop of the 1960s also brought fights for civil rights, human rights, and against the Vietnam War. Here's the kicker, though. All those revolutions and movements were fueled by passion that held a very dark underbelly: addiction. And while protesters waved placards chanting, "Make love, not war," behind them were shadows of addicts descending like black-clad spectres, clutching instruments that would only later be accompanied by stories of despair. Love was alive in the air, but so was despair, and for many it was a dance to an all-too-personal tune. But let's not get too melancholic, as humour often sneaks in where sorrow tries to take the lead. The sheer spectacle of parties held by the elite of the 60s became ridiculous caricatures of societal trends as peace and love collided with turn a blind eye. After all, combine the decadent lifestyle of rock stars with the coping mechanisms of the times, and the result was often like watching a highly polylined circus act spiralling into chaos. "Look at me, I'm flying high," they'd say, while beneath it all was a yearning for balance that felt as elusive as a cat on a hot tin roof. Though this wave of drug use shook the foundation of the American psyche, it also birthed a new dialogue. The darkness of addiction began to seep into the collective literary consciousness, where exposure was the first step to healing. David Bowie sang about his own heroin use, as if to say, "I embody chaos, but I'm also pushing through." Perhaps in truth the answer was never in the highs or the lows, but in recognising that life, like an excellent rock opera, has its tragedies wrapped in vibrato, and as much as we might try to giggle through it, the truth remains. We're all just trying to make sense of this crazy, swirling ride we call life. So as the bright and attractive chaos of the 60s loomed large, heroin quietly carved its own space, a sinister undertone to a time when innocence bloomed amongst wildflowers and psychedelic dreams. Hermann Hesse once said, "Some of us think holding on makes us strong, but sometimes it's letting go." And though the world struggled to find solace amidst addiction, perhaps the greatest revolution of this era would be the acknowledgement of suffering. It just took longer to manifest than anyone would have hoped. The drumbeats got louder, and an epidemic emerged. Suddenly, heroin wasn't just a personal disaster, it was a national crisis. Neighbourhoods turned into hotspots of despair, and first responders were redirected from saving lives to diving deep into a daunting battlefield. The term epidemic seemed to redefine what it meant to be all in regarding addiction. Cue the fitting tagline, "We've all been living in a dark comedic tragedy." As people stumbled through foggy streets like extras from a low-budget zombie movie, the substance claimed a title few wanted, America's most unwanted houseguest. The only thing missing was a formal invitation, one that everyone seemed to have accidentally sent out. The stories began to flood the airwaves. News reports paraded the heart-wrenching tales of individuals who had once held dreams of becoming astronauts, musicians, or even the world's next great sandwich artist, now reduced to hollow shells of their former selves. Parents would cry on camera, claiming, "We never expected it to happen to us." Meanwhile, local lawmakers held press conferences peppered with calls for stricter regulations, as if passing a new law would miraculously transform the lives of users like a fairy godmother with a magical gavel. But who was the real fairy tale villain here? Was it heroin, or perhaps society's inability to address the root causes of addiction? Cue the dramatic music. As neighbourhoods devolved from vibrant community spots into shadows of their former selves, you could literally smell the despair wafting in the air. It was less of a "let's have a picnic" scent and more akin to an unseasoned casserole left in the sun. But it wasn't just the drug users suffering. The ripple effects cascaded through families, leaving behind wreckage like a poorly planned demolition job. Schools emptied out, workplaces braced for losses, and those who stood on the edge of the crisis began to wonder if their innocence might soon buckle under pressure. The whole episode encapsulated a morbid curiosity. How many times could a person hit rock bottom before they accidentally bounced back up? And as the opioid crisis gained momentum, it sparked unexpected bedfellows in the fight against addiction. Opposition parties, once known more for squabbling over the contents of a budget speech than wrestling with the complexities of a syringe-laden society, found themselves in unexpected alliances. Activists, doctors, and even recovering addicts joined forces alongside government officials in an effort reminiscent of the ultimate buddy cop movie. Picture it, an ex-user teaming up with a federal agent to go undercover in a dark alley to save their community. A potpourri of lunacy forged in a shared mission. Amidst the madness, the medical community found itself pivoting from simply doling out prescriptions like candy to screening patients with the suspicion usually reserved for asymmetrical moustaches. Doctors began, to steer clear of the easy fix mentality, realizing to their horror they'd become unwitting enablers, handing out pills like they were party favours. Sure, take this OxyContin, they'd say, oblivious to the fallout ahead while secretly thinking, at least it's not cake. Now they were tasked with navigating the murky waters of patient care and addiction, trying to treat the very demons they'd inadvertently unleashed into society. And of course, let's not overlook the power of social media, where tales of despair and redemption flank each post like overly aggressive cheerleaders. Hashtags like Chusk Heroin Addiction and Clean and Sober appeared on our feeds, capturing real-life narratives filled with emotion and vulnerability. Yet, while some sought solace in digital communities, countless others shared videos that danced along the line of dark humour. One moment you're struck by the gut-wrenching tribulations of addiction, and the next you're scrolling through memes proclaiming, "I thought adulting would be more fun," complete with cartoon characters sipping coffee from mugs labelled "not that great." And therein lies the pure irony of it all. Our ability to laugh in the face of adversity often walks hand in hand with tragedy. The struggle being waged couldn't simply be downloaded like an app. There was no instruction manual on how to cure addiction once it settled in as a resident. Yes, the chaos continued, but as society stumbled its way through this public health emergency, scraps of hope began to shine. Advocacy groups gained traction, launching initiatives that resonated with communities yearning for understanding. Their messages echoed deep, urging acceptance over ostracism. Could springtime bloom after such a bleak winter? Perhaps. As the curtain of despair began to lift, a new narrative emerged that suggested heroin's absurd grip on society was not an indelible ink stain, but rather a message reminding everyone that there is always a path back. With shared stories and the collective will to understand and heal, society learned that when it comes to addiction, we have the power to rewrite the ending. After all, if there's anything we've discovered, it's that humour can lift the heaviest beats of a national crisis, even when pulling through the muck of a dark comedic tragedy. Buckle in for a trip down media lane where the stories take on a life of their own. News outlets overtook the morning coffee chats, spinning tales that tended toward sensationalism. Feelings of urgency overtook reality, and as ratings soared, the real-life struggles began to fade into the background, painted over with sensationalist brushstrokes. How could anyone tackle addiction with the same panache as a nightly crime drama? You turn on the news, and there it is, glamorous portrayals of the underbelly of addiction, anecdotes filled with drama, intrigue, and, let's be real, more than a sprinkle of melodrama. It's like watching a telenovela, but with less passion and more overdoses. You see headlines about heroin epidemics, and suddenly the issue transforms into a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. But the agony, the struggle, and the human tales, they become mere footnotes in a sensationalist script that plays on repeat every evening. It's a bit like ordering a deli sandwich but only getting the bread and no filling. You're left hungry, confused, and possibly craving a whole different kind of snack. As the media grabs hold of the heroin narrative, it morphs addiction into a danger that lurks in every dark corner. You can almost hear the ominous music playing in the background while the anchor leans forward, eyes wide, saying, "And if you think it won't happen to you or someone you love, think again." Thanks for the reassurances, but simultaneously instilling fear. Nice touch. Perhaps they should hand out stress balls during these segments, because the ratings are going to need some serious soothing after all that chaos. And here's where we catch a delightful slice of irony. On one hand, the media's sensationalism sheds light on a dire public health crisis. On the other, It conveniently overlooks the complexity of addiction, painting a world that's black and white. The reality, however, is murky. It's a kaleidoscope of emotions, narratives, and personal struggles, tangled in a web of socio-economic factors, access to health care, and systemic failures. But that doesn't quite fit the mould of a gripping 5-part documentary miniseries, does it? No. Instead, let's focus on a suburban mom whose life spiraled down into a vortex of despair over the course of a just enough time for the commercial break storyline. Speaking of commercial breaks, let's not forget the jarring contrast between sensational news and advertisements. After all the anxiety-inducing reports, what do we see? A shiny prescription ad promising more relief than concern. The smiling faces of people, sunshine beaming down, touting a magical pill that will alleviate all your woes without any prospect of addiction. It's a clever trick. One moment you're gripped by fear, and the next you're led to believe the salvation is just a phone call away. Dial 1-800 of pain be gone, and you can say goodbye to your worries. Just don't mind the 8 side effects listed at 300 words per minute in an almost inaudible whisper. Amidst this constant seesawing, daily life struggles of addicted individuals or families are often treated as incidental. They flash across the screen, sometimes as a statistic, maybe as a segment featuring a before and after story. It's important to put a face behind those statistics. But when does it get to be a touch too much theatrics? How do we humanise their journey without turning it into a sensational soap opera? One can't help but feel the grotesque irony. When a person's suffering becomes fodder for ratings, the humanity gets stripped away just like a corny romance plot in a 90s film. But all hope isn't lost, my friends. Alongside the flashy headlines and dizzying camera work, a few brave souls have emerged, using the very same media to tell their stories authentically. Enter the brave warriors of addiction recovery who decide to step into the spotlight, not as tragic figures, but as heroes of their own narratives. With podcasts, blogs, and various social media platforms, they pick up their proverbial pens and erase the sensationalist stuff, opting instead for raw, real-life chronicles seasoned with humour and relentless courage. Suddenly their stories weave a fresh narrative filled with resilience, offering hope and connectivity like a cosy blanket on a chilly evening. So as we navigate the tumultuous waters of media perceptions surrounding heroin addiction, let's keep a keen eye on those narratives, both the sensational ones and the authentic journeys. Because while the media may shoot for the stars, it's essential we remember the individuals woven into the fabric of addiction, yearning for understanding more than sensationalism. After all, in this bizarre play called life, we've all got a part to play, and sometimes it's a comedy, sometimes it's a tragedy, but mostly it's a little of both. Enter the 1980s, when the government declared war on drugs and hilarity ensued, for lack of a better term. Are we defending our society or just creating a larger mess? Policies emerged that were more theatrical than effective, and the only real casualties? Lives caught up in the crossfire of misguided fervour that could only be described as tragicomic. Imagine a stage where law enforcement agencies, politicians and social influencers all took their roles seriously, yet somehow choreography resembled a 3-ring circus more than a carefully orchestrated fight for justice. It's as if everyone was trapped in a soap opera that had lost its plot but retained the melodrama. Let's dive into the bizarre world of anti-drug campaigns, where slogans like "Just Say No" became the battle cry. Ironically, it sounded less like a serious policy and more like a misguided advice column gone awry. If only telling teens to just say no were as effective as brushing your teeth to ward off cavities. But alas, telling people not to indulge in sweet temptation rarely yields real results. You might as well have told a cat not to chase a laser pointer. The approach seemed to scream, "Hey kids, want to try it in the most rebellious way possible?" Because really, nothing ignites curiosity quite like an adult telling you what you can't do. Next, we saw the rise of raiding parties and absurdly constructed media events. Think drug busts celebrated with balloons, confetti, and perhaps a t-shirt cannon. Those who fought the good fight quickly turned into walking memes. Law enforcement found their reputations under the spotlight as they proudly showcased confiscated mountains of plants and powders. It was like a festival for the absurd. A funhouse mirror reflecting misplaced priorities. Officers pumped out press releases filled with rabid enthusiasm as if they'd just sealed a deal with an Oscar-winning film crew, only to find themselves facing an audience laughing harder than they expected. 100 pounds of heroin seized today. Look what we did. Meanwhile, the actual heroin users remained largely unfazed and undeterred, slipping through the fingers of the system like greased eels with a knack for avoiding attention. And let's not forget the heartwarming yet utterly misguided efforts of the community programs spawned from this war, a la Dare to Keep Kids Off Drugs. With programs resembling a poorly conceived after-school special, volunteers were handed pamphlets to present to school kids. Drugs are bad, don't ever touch them. With all the passion of a motivational speaker at junior high pep rally, these champions attempted to compete against a culture of widespread availability and emotional confusion kidnapped as rock stars in their own right. What happened next? Some kids saw these presentations as a badge of honour to rebel against. Because, nothing says cool like a school program meant to ward you off from the very thing you now perceive as revolutionary. As if the humour wasn't thick enough, we saw America's heavy-handed approach evolve into some truly bizarre tactics. Imagine elaborate ladder-climbing operations that could make a modern-day villain proud. The government created elaborate sting operations worthy of a heist movie. They had undercover agents in everything from Hawaiian shirts to faux mom jeans. Because nothing builds trust among suspects like looking remarkably conspicuous while sipping soda out of a Hawaiian travel mug. Caught in a web of secrecy, many innocent citizens, instead of discovering justice, got swept into government chaos. Why is this guy pretending to be my neighbour, they wondered. Spoiler alert, he was definitely not there to borrow sugar. But beneath all the absurdity was a troubling truth. As communities became war zones filled with fear and distrust, innocent lives hung in the balance. Families were ripped apart and the pain became a repetitive cycle that echoed through generations. The sheer futility of it all opened the door further into a quagmire of suffering that couldn't easily be undone. And just as the government tried to backpedal and take responsibility for its messy policies, radical new approaches began bubbling up from grassroots movements. People started reconsidering how to tackle addiction. With openness emerged new philosophies of harm reduction, acceptance and healing. If you've got a ticket to the twilight zone of addiction, let's hope you brought your sense of humour. Judging from the 80s, it needs some serious comic relief. So, there you have it. The War on Drugs, a tangled, chaotic dance of governmental missteps and societal insanity. While the spectacle may be steeped in humour, the consequences weren't merely punchlines. They were genuine tragedies waiting for reconciliation. The laughter might fade, but the lessons, those resonate long after the show's lights dim. It's time to get deep and philosophical about the psychological horror at play. The long-term effect of addiction seem too vast to tackle in a single lifetime, but do we have a choice? Cue the psychological warfare that begins to unfold in the affected families. It's a horror show of isolation, broken homes and mental illness, grappling with societal shame that leaves everyone with a runaway punchline. Imagine a family dinner. The turkey is overcooked, and the awkward silences are louder than any of the chatter. Uncle Bob is currently debating whether to pass the potatoes or the judgment on his now-gone cousin. Does anyone notice the tension? Not really. Everyone's too tuned in to their own trauma to acknowledge the pink elephant that just tripped over Grandma's crochet basket. As addiction weaves its way through families like an unwanted guest who knows too much, you can't help but notice the chaos stirs like a witch's brew in a forgotten corner. There's guilt, shame, frustration, and a plethora of unspoken accusations simmering beneath every mundane interaction. Families become battlegrounds where the combatants, heroin and love, clash like epic titans. Perhaps it's easier to throw in jokes at Thanksgiving and pretend everything's perfectly normal. After all, what's a little addiction among family? Just another flavour in a box of mixed candies, right? Wrong. It's more like the explosive pop rocks that disconnect your jaw while you chew. But the impact of addiction doesn't stop at the doorstep. Oh no, it creeps into the schoolyard too. Children of addicted parents often bear the brunt of stigma, feeling like pariahs without a vacation package. In a world where everyone else is giving PowerPoint presentations about their wonderful summer vacations, they're left silently contemplating the difference between family trips and visits to rehab facilities. It's like attending a birthday party where everyone is wearing party hats, everyone except you. You might as well be wearing a wish they were normal t-shirt. And mental health? Let's not forget about that wrinkle in the blanket of emotional strain. As if navigating a minefield of expectations wasn't enough, many children of addicted parents start to develop their own coping mechanisms. Poorly armed against the storm, they may resort to anything from anxiety to depression, jumping from one mental health crisis to the next, hoping the lifeguard of normalcy is on duty. It's a wild ride down a winding path of confusion that feels less like life and more like fighting ghosts in a haunted maze. The psychological costs ripple through generations. As parents struggle with their own demons, their kids inherit not only trauma, but also these fractured reflections of love. Imagine trying to explain this cycle to a therapist who probably has their own couch and coffee tin filled with anxiety. So, my mum was addicted, and now, when I see ice cream I panic. Is that normal? And guess what? There's no manual on how to break that cycle, because every attempt feels like snipping the tape of a badly wrapped present. What's inside? Only chaos gift-wrapped in strained relationships and unfulfilled potential waiting to explode. Here lies another layer of irony. The concept of community plays a significant role in both moderating and exacerbating the psychological fallout of addiction. Some communities band together like a superhero squad, shuffling resources, support groups, and that essential good old-fashioned understanding. Others? Well, they stand at the ready with their pitchforks and torches, ready to burn anyone they deem different. Cue the judgmental eyes in the grocery store, the ones that see you reach for something sweet and tremble with sympathy, but also with judgment. They may as well wear signs that say, "You'll never be normal." In the midst of such psychological turmoil, here's the kicker. People have an astonishing ability to adapt. Despite the storm clouds looming, many find ways to patch the holes in their emotional sails. Some seek therapy, because evidently talking to trained professionals beats taking parenting tips from social media influencers. Others find solace in art, exercise or support systems that remind them that light can shine through even the deepest darkness. So what's the takeaway here? Besides the urge to laugh at the absurdity of life, understand that the psychological fallout of addiction is multifaceted and complex. Like tofu in a stir-fry, you never quite know how someone will respond to its inclusion. Compassion, Understanding and a dash of humour can serve as the lifeline in a world that so often seems bent on breaking the human spirit. After all, surviving in the wake of addiction may not look like your perfect Pinterest board, but it's a story worth sharing nonetheless. A compelling saga of chaos, resilience, and perhaps the occasional burst of laughter amid the wreckage. Now let's continue this journey and explore onward. Who knows what amazing lessons await us beyond this labyrinth of psychological turmoil? "What do I do?" cries the pill-peddling physician as families wade through the web of addiction. Doctors begin to question their role as both healers and participants in this tragic irony. They meant to help people, not send them down spirals of dependency. Cue the comedic confusion as patients become patients with underlying issues cast aside like broken puppets in a tragic theatre. The doors swing open like they're on a suspenseful hinge at the start of a horror movie. "Can I get a prescription?" an eager patient shouts, blissfully unaware of the dark comedy unfolding. Picture a bustling waiting room filled with folks who all seem to be auditioning for a role in Desperate Addicts, complete with shifty glances and overly eager smiles. Meanwhile, the doctor sits at their desk, caught between wanting to alleviate pain and the stark realization that they're inadvertently holding a loaded gun. With a rush of caffeine-fueled optimism, they juggle the dichotomy of life-saving and life-eroding. "It's just a prescription," thinks our dear doctor, as they scribble on their pad like a mad artist instead of asserting authority or pulling the metaphorical emergency brake on this runaway train. Who knew opioids could transform good intentions into a spectacular circus performance, where addiction becomes the main act and the undercurrent is confusion? As the day rolls on, chaos ensues. The doctor's time management skills are under scrutiny. Each appointment feels like a high-stakes game show, and the prize is preventing further entrenchment in addiction. Just when they think they've cracked the code, a patient bursts in, speaking in tongues of "I need it more" and "just this one time," while the doctor fumbles through medical history charts, hoping to find a glimmer of sanity somewhere among the notes. It's like navigating a tangled web made of elastic thoughts and sweet desperation. "Look," the doctor thinks, wiping their sweat-streaked brow, "I'm supposed to be in control here." But when faced with a sea of pleading eyes, it feels more like being the reluctant captain of a ship navigating through enormous waves, only to discover that half of the crew is on deck wearing life jackets made of addiction. How can one manage both the saviour and the siren calls of despair? As the clock ticks and appointments stack up like unwashed dishes in a fraternity house, this physician dives into an existential crisis that leaves them mumbling like a quirky philosopher. Am I a healer or an enabler? Is the question that haunts their every step. Each day turns into a game of morality, like trying to choose a salad at a barbecue. Delightfully healthy while dodging around greasy burgers and hot dogs of guilt. When the doctor finally makes the tough call to refer one of these frazzled addicts to a rehab program, they almost expect a welcome to reality confetti shower to erupt in the office. But instead they get a familiar dodge from the patient. "I can handle it myself, just one more round." It's like trying to teach a cat to fetch. Nothing seems to stick. Doctors find themselves facing the relentless onslaught of commitment phobia that rivals any romantic relationship crisis. Multitasking between prescriptions and sobriety support, these professionals turn into unintentional performance artists, showcasing the many ways they must bend over backward, just to keep the curtain from falling on their ethical dilemmas. Get ready for good old Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde mixed with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where the stakes involve life or death rather than cash. Amid the pandemonium, both patient and doctor share a knowing look. It's both tragic and ridiculous, riddled with chaos and humour. "We're in this together," they seem to confess silently, while the clock ticks to infinity, nudging them toward a path of resilience they never signed up for. Yet, In the swirling eddy of confusion lies a tiny flicker of hope. Doctors begin to think outside the blueprints of conventional medicine, looking for innovative techniques that respect the human spirit. They do what they can, experimenting with therapies, attending seminars, and attempting the quintessential dance of addressing addiction while also providing care. And maybe, just maybe, they will find their footing amidst the wild spin of life, or at least become the savvy navigators of this medical merry-go-round. So as our bewildered physicians piece together their fragmented thoughts amidst the absurdity of addiction, they gauge their growing understanding that while they may not have all the answers, they're definitely part of a monumental expression of humanity, a play that seems never-ending but has brilliant, albeit sometimes humorous moments scattered throughout. Amidst the chaos, there emerges a flicker of hope. Non-profits swing into action, cobbling together resources and heroic movements geared towards saving lives. Their efforts are a refreshing breeze in a society that has nearly drowned. But it's still a wild ride navigating the confusion and stigma associated with the subject of addiction. Are they crusaders, or just stubborn dreamers hoping for change? Picture the scene. A group of impassioned individuals sporting t-shirts that declare hugs not judgments and recovery is possible. Gathering in a dimly lit church basement, they huddle over stacks of pamphlets and warm pastries that look suspiciously close to last week's leftovers. If only the world outside could feel that same fervour over this kaleidoscope of human experience. You start hearing tales that make even your wildest dreams seem tame, stories of ordinary people who have turned their lives around. One moment they're deep in the fog of addiction, and the next they're comfortably sharing their triumphs like a toddler boasting about their latest art project. I used to think on a daily basis that I was just seconds away from dying. Now I can bake cookies without burning down the kitchen. The light-hearted banter, buoyed by laughter, becomes a lifeline that makes those dealing with addiction feel less isolated. This is one of the great paradoxes of the recovery movement. It thrives on humour even as it addresses such a grave issue. Of course, effective non-profits need more than just enthusiasm and a gaggle of cookies. They need funding. Cue the comical quest for grants, where the real battle becomes finding reliable finances while navigating the bureaucratic minefield. Imagine composed non-profit managers huddled over a computer screen, earnestly completing grant applications, only to realise the funding guidelines are as clear as mud. Want to meet the criteria? You'll find yourself writing mission statements that could rival a work of Shakespeare, and let's not even begin on the budget proposals that look like they were penned by a conspiracy theorist. Here's my budget, it fits on a napkin. Reasonable, right? Nonetheless, persistence pays off. With each grant won, stories of recovery multiply, spreading like wildfire. People who once felt lost now find purpose working at these non-profits, sharing experiences and developing empathy. The meetings transform into a festival of compassion and camaraderie, where the healing power of collective experience begins to shatter stigma. As they share their journeys, laughter punctuates the recovery narratives. You know, one shares, I thought I was invincible until I discovered that my party time consisted of me throwing my phone out the window while calling my mother 10 times in a row. It's these comical twists of fate that remind everyone that humour can indeed be the best medicine, even when sobered by the reality of addiction. Stop and smell the roses, or perhaps the coffee brewing merrily in the corner of the community garden that these heroes have created. Every flower planted is a symbol of resilience, a reminder that beauty can sprout in the most unexpected places. Through education, advocacy and community support, they become beacons illuminating a path back to stability. The people who once felt invisible come alive as they nurture both gardens and souls, laughing together as they dig their hands into the soil, planting tiny miracles of hope. It's a battle against the tides, and each small success feels monumental. These non-profits champion the cause, offering more than just help. They create space for conversations, changing the landscape of how we discuss addiction. They leverage social media like knights with shining armour, utilising hashtags like DOSAddiction, awareness, and gas recovery. It's possible to engage the masses. You can almost picture a post. Feeling down? Just because you can't see the end of your road doesn't mean it isn't well paved with love and cookies. Bravely, they kneel before the throne of misunderstanding, wielding laughter like a sword against the stigmas that so often ensnare individuals battling addiction. In this vibrant ecosystem of recovery, hope thrives and connections blossom, reminding us that the battle against addiction isn't drawn in black and white. It flourishes in shades of humanity, where every misstep becomes an opportunity for growth, and every touch of laughter fuels the heart. There's an undeniable magic in the movement. People unite, their strength echoing louder than addiction's whispers. So let's celebrate these unsung heroes, doing the gritty work while making us laugh until we cry, and inspiring a generation to believe in the power of second chances. And then the philosophy of harm reduction enters the picture, striving to make harm bingo the new cool kid in town. Imagine a world where people can choose what to do without judgment. What a radical idea! Can you picture a compassionate approach that doesn't condemn but recognises reality, even when stretches of laughter feel utterly ironic? It sounds like an idealistic utopia, but this wasn't simply about rosy sentiments. It became a vital necessity in addressing the heroin crisis. Suddenly, society discovered that pointing fingers and locking people up wasn't working. Who knew that treating addiction like a personal failure could be more damaging than the substance itself? Let's take a stroll through the golden age of harm reduction, shall we? Picture neon bright pamphlets popping up in community centres with catchy slogans like "Better safe than sorry" and "You can't catch the flu if you wash your hands. Same goes for your needles." Gone were the days of "just say no." Enter the era of "let's at least make it somewhat safer," where clean needle exchanges and safe consumption sites became the glamorous rescue boats in a stormy sea of addiction. How utterly bizarre that the world of public health turned toward what seemed to be a carnival of compromise to save lives. In these first steps toward compassion, local community groups began distributing clean needles faster than your friend could hand out party favours at a birthday bash. "Here, take this, and don't forget to keep your own blood inside your veins where it belongs." This was the scoop of reality that landed softly but firmly on society's doorstep. It seemed almost absurd to think that giving someone clean tools could actually reduce the risk of diseases like HIV or hepatitis C, yet here we were, smashing stigmas right and left with the humility of those who just wanted to keep their neighbours alive. As you dive deeper into these programs, you quickly discover that harm reduction wasn't merely concerned with the needles. No. It encompassed education about overdose prevention, access to Narcan, the miracle nasal spray that revives folks from the brink, and even support for mental health. Imagine having a chat with someone who's like, "Okay, you really shouldn't be doing this, but if you do, can I at least offer you a few tips to keep you from being a statistic?" Now that's a conversation no one's ever had in the sterile walls of conventional treatment. But let's switch gears and talk about the skeptics. Oh yes, they exist. Picture a concerned citizen in a sweater vest clutching their pearls exclaiming, "Aren't we just encouraging them to keep using? I mean, I get it. It's challenging to grapple with empowering such decisions. Yet here's the reality twist. Harm reduction isn't about enabling reckless abandon. It's about planting seeds of safety in a space that previously hosted nothing but judgment. Think of it as handing out umbrellas at a rain dance rather than telling everyone to stop dancing in the first place. The irony gleamed brightly as these approaches began to shift perceptions. The so-called junkies began transforming into clients, individuals with needs, and dare I say, fellow humans. Suddenly it wasn't about categorizing their worth based on their drug use, but instead about collaborating together to find pathways through recovery, including empowering them to make choices and setting boundaries that worked best for their lives. You can imagine community centres buzzing like a Friday night, a potluck of ideas and resources flowing freely. Drop-in centres popped up, where people shared stories with more warmth than fear. You'd overhear snippets of support like, "Hey buddy, maybe try a little less than last time, alright? We need you back here next week for lunch." Laughter intertwined with fellowship like a warm hug that declared, "We're in this together. Let's find solutions that don't involve judgment." As the decade progressed, evidence began pouring in, much like that classic file marked urgent on your desk at work. Studies reported reductions in infectious diseases, declines in overdose deaths, and increased access to treatment. It turned out community-based approaches were making strides. Imagine! Society got a wake-up call from harm reduction, reminding everyone that sharing needles is far less hazardous than sharing scorn. Who knew humans could adopt a mindset focused on love and support rather than shame? So, as we look back at this colourful chapter in history, the irony dangles like a piñata full of treats. Harm reduction may not be the perfect solution, but it certainly painted a path coloured with compassion. Encouraging conversations, kindness and reform, we learned it's possible to embrace those trapped in the clutches of addiction while wielding humour and humanity as the ultimate allies. After all, what's funnier than dangling the carrot of empowerment over well-intentioned ostracism? Because in the end, we're all trying to navigate life's absurd and rocky paths, and sometimes a little love and a clean needle goes a long way. As we shine a light on public figures who have battled addiction, we uncover an odd fascination. Why are we drawn to the stories of rock stars and starlets who tumble into the abyss? Celebrities provide a bizarre sense of relatability for the rest of us. A morbid kind of empathy that says, if they can fall flat on their faces and get up to sing another tune, what's stopping you? Their lives appear so sparkly and glamorous, yet so often they resemble a reality show gone wrong. A cautionary tale wrapped in sequins and Hollywood hype. Picture a reality TV episode where the plot twist involves a very public meltdown, complete with paparazzi flashbulbs exploding like fireworks and social media spiralling into a meme frenzy. Suddenly, their problems become our entertainment. It's like watching a circus elephant attempt yoga. Utterly chaotic, but oddly captivating. Just take a visit down the rabbit hole of recent celebrity dramas. The artist last seen escaping a rehab centre, the it girl, whose Instagram stories veer sharply from avocado toast to scowling recovery meetings. We sit back, popcorn in hand, eagerly consuming their chaos like it's a new Netflix documentary, while thinking, yes, if only I could purchase that brand of messiness on my streaming service. In a way, it's comforting. Their struggles often mirror our own, perhaps not with substances, but with life decisions that might lead us down some dizzy roads, like the time you thought trying to make your own kombucha was a good idea until it exploded in your fridge, leaving you with a sticky mess and a distinct distrust of bubbly liquids. Let's not forget the wild irony at play. Celebrities represent the pinnacle of success, yet simultaneously become the poster children for substance abuse. It's like witnessing your neighbour win the lottery and then get kicked out of their house for building a flamingo-infested amusement park for their cats. Their fame draws us in, and yet their addiction feels like an unexpected plot twist, a reminder that fame can't buy happiness or immunity from struggles. The musical genius spirals. Just listen to the lovely notes of his latest hit that thoughtfully intersperse heart-wrenching confessions about addiction. With each strum of the guitar that moans of longing and despair, we can't help but nod along like, yup, he's one of us. Except he also has a 7-figure salary and a collection of cars that might rival a state fair. In an age displaying the eternal chase for likes and followers, we stumble across idolised figures signing "I'm not okay," while literally rolling through red carpet events in designer threads. However, celebrity struggles are not merely personal, they foster a culture of dialogue. Take the courageous stars who've chosen to pull back the curtain on mental health, using their platforms to normalise vulnerability. They advocate for treatment and recovery, turning rock bottom anecdotes into inspirational tirades. Their journey is subtly sprinkled with lessons, reminders that redemption is possible, even for those who've danced perilously close to the edge while screaming every verse to their favourite power ballad. A key part of this saga centres around how fans react. Watching celebrities navigate addiction feels like peering through a magnifying glass at a real-life drama. Fans often morph into self-proclaimed experts, giving unsolicited advice on social media, rallying for interventions from the comfort of their sofas. Comment sections bubble over with wisdom like, "Did you see her latest meltdown? Clearly needs better friends." It's like watching a medical drama and suddenly thinking you're qualified enough to wield a scalpel because you once bandaged a scraped knee. Yet even the most glamorous celebs aren't immune to grim realities. The road to recovery is riddled with potent offers, each just as engaging as the last. The path takes them through support groups and rehab centres that make the waiting room of your local doctor's office feel like a spa retreat. Meanwhile, their stories of setbacks become fodder for tabloids, increasing their worth. It's a comedy of errors, yet every misstep is magnified as millions tune in. While viewers guiltily snack through their dramas, the entertainers' struggles remain a hot topic, watercooler gossip laced with sympathy. As we disembark from this celebrity escapade, what's the final takeaway? While lives of the rich and famous spiral in public view, they inevitably draw their audiences in, amalgamating entertainment with reality. And in witnessing their fallible humanity, we discover that maybe, just maybe, the road to recovery isn't just a personal journey, it's a cycle that connects us all. So next time a celebrity stumbles, remember they aren't just windows as they tumble, they're mirrors reflecting our own struggles to find footing amid life's idiotic tango. Welcome to the 1990s, where urban decay and grunge collide in an awkward but visually striking way. The concept of heroin chic emerges, turning an epidemic into aesthetic fodder for the media to feast upon. It's the ultimate case of mistaken identity, a narrative that's as tragic as it is ironically hip. Who can forget the paradoxical allure of thin models and hollowed-out eyes as fashionable personas? It was as if the fashion world thought, why not glamorise addiction? And with that, the runway transformed into a surreal circus where the lesson of the day was, look, but don't touch, unless you're dabbing on some eyeliner or curling your hair into a chic mess that truly screams neglect. Picture it. Skinny models strutting down in oversized flannel shirts, ripped jeans, and an exaggerated look of malaise. In an age that celebrated everything from plaid patterns to leftover angst from the 80s, the fashion editors seemingly took a page from a very unfortunate diary. They thought to themselves, how can we capture authenticity? And guess what? They concluded that authenticity looked a lot like a post-apocalyptic scene. What could be better than an entire aesthetic based on the fleeting beauty of a drug-infused haze? And thus the rise of heroin chic was born, and with it, the double-edged sword of societal misunderstanding. As this trend swept into shops and high-fashion photo shoots, one could almost hear the collective yikes echoing through the halls of medical and prevention organisations. The world saw an image of fragile beauty, but they forgot, or perhaps ignored, the chilling reality of addiction crouching just behind those dishevelled hairstyles. It was as if fashion had decided to adopt a pet iguana, not realising that iguanas don't born themselves into benign little buddies for the aesthetic. Their buzz and creativity came at the price of lives in turmoil. It's like watching a horror movie while someone pops popcorn beside you, and you're left grappling with the two contrasting feelings of craving a snack while also wanting to scream. With each magazine spread flaunting gaunt cheekbones and lace-whispered bravado, the lines between admiration and tragedy blurred. Advertisements featured photos where the sunlight hit just right. Shadows accentuated the jutting bones, and smoky eyes became an almost poetic representation of aesthetic risk-taking. Oh yes. "She's high fashion," said the editor, as if by some stroke of luck. Those very photographs weren't accompanied by real stories of disappointment, addiction and heartache. It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. The industry began marketing heroin chic as sophisticated, even glamorous. But here's the twist. While they put models on pedestals, others struggled in alleys, coping with a very real stigma that came hand in hand with addiction. One could argue it's like handing out candy covered in razor blades while telling kids it's Halloween fun. Not all that glitters is gold, folks, and yet many continued to chase that gleam without comprehension. The chic demanded by idolatry often went hand in hand with new drug trends. Suddenly, the same voices that heralded fashion managed to craft narratives that echoed through protests from activists who spotted this grotesque trend. Meanwhile, the streets, filled with life-torn residents gripped by addiction's claws, cried out. "You think this is chic?" they would shout. "You consider our suffering a lifestyle choice?" As the backlash grew, advocates warned against the voyeuristic glamorization of suffering. It felt as if the nation were gasping in disbelief while waving a sign that screamed "not cool." When the fashion world finally woke up from its slumber, the realization sunk in. Heroin chic was more than just a trend. It was a cultural terror representing fear, loss, and a disconnection from reality. Society stumbled awkwardly through this bitter pill, eventually leading to a pushback that focused more on understanding addiction than celebrating its aesthetic. Awareness campaigns emerged that fostered conversations around substance use, and the sloppy imbalance of glamorizing addiction began to dissolve like sugar in hot coffee. In conclusion, while the heroin chic of the 90s may have captured the spirit of rebellion and fashionable risk, it perpetuated a dangerous narrative that many sought to overturn. Slowly but surely, the industry learned that depicting the grotesque with a glitzy sheen could never be a substitute for the reality of survival. And as we reflect on this period, we're reminded that fashion, art, and culture should embrace authenticity in its many forms, especially when it comes to acknowledging vulnerability. So rather than strut through the ruins of glamorized addiction, let's surround ourselves with genuine understanding and care, where empathy becomes the new trend we can all embrace. As technology enters the scene, an array of solutions provides new avenues to help fight addiction. Online communities emerge, building connections like digital lifelines in a vast sea of struggle. Social media becomes a therapeutic canvas, allowing stories to emerge in a whirlwind of hashtags and emojis. Will it all stick? Or will it dissolve into a fleeting trend? Imagine scrolling through your phone only to stumble upon an Instagram feed dedicated to recovery tips, where virtual high fives and supportive comments bounce around like popcorn in a microwave. It's a world where vulnerability is a badge of honor, and even the darkest tales earn a round of applause, or at least a few compassionate likes. Picture this. Someone posts a selfie with a cheesy grin and the caption, 30 days sober, blessed. How refreshing. Now, if that were the medieval era, their only chance at support would have been to whisper it in the ear of a passing cat, as they were apparently the only witnesses to human drama back then. But now we've fast-forwarded into a digital dimension where millions can cheer each other on from the comfort of their couches, phones in hand, as they navigate the rocky roads of recovery. But as welcoming and warm as it sounds, let's address the elephant in the virtual room. Are these online communities effective? In a world of memes, can real healing take place? As the saying goes, they were never really there for me could easily shift to, they're only there with me for the likes. Amid perfect clips of sunsets and motivational quotes, do users find actual camaraderie, or do they just bask in the glow of pixelated companionship? Now let's take a moment to explore the algorithms driving this newfound digital camaraderie. Imagine them as the annoying but oddly helpful little fairies who know exactly what you need, popping up just when you're about to scroll past yet another cat video. You share your struggle with cravings, and suddenly, your feed fills with support groups, inspirational podcasts, and motivational speakers, all conveniently located a fingertip away. It's like magic, or perhaps just a skilled digital marketing strategy that senses desperation better than your mum at Thanksgiving dinner. Yet, with all the good, there's the persistent presence of the digital trolls who find pleasure in spreading negativity faster than a viral cat meme. One bad comment can be like a summon for a swarm of naysayers. Oh, you think you can recover? How cute. That can leave anyone questioning their journey. It's ironic. Just as easily as someone can find connection and support, they can succumb to the echo chambers of doubt and despair. So, is there a way to mute the trolls while amplifying the community voices? Let's also not forget about telemedicine, an innovation that swoops in like a superhero with a proper cape. Forget the tedious waiting rooms filled with awkward small talk and questionable magazines. Now, with a few taps, you can engage with professionals who may actually know what they're doing. The power of video calls saves you from having to shuffle in wearing yesterday's pajamas, instead allowing you to awkwardly chat openly, sometimes clad in overpriced therapy robes that provide all the comfort of a warm hug without having to step outside. And with doctors offering prescriptions via text, you can text thanks without giving a thought to whether or not they've touched your wallet. But are we still getting personal care? Or is our humanity on the brink of getting lost in the flurry of pixels? Of course, the digital evolution hasn't escaped the watchful eye of traditionalists. They may look upon these methods with the same skepticism reserved for first-time social media users. In their minds, healing needs to be messy and raw, not filtered and hashtagged. Maybe they weren't scrolling through the Democratic National Convention's Instagram page and didn't witness the power of digital activism firsthand. Keep in mind that online platforms create a virtual soapbox for the voiceless to share their tales of triumph over trauma, often gathering wider interest than any aged pamphlet ever could. As we step back and evaluate the role of technology in fighting addiction, a newfound hope emerges. While it's great that social media powers the sharing of struggles, only time will tell if this new age community can provide the foundation for lifelong recovery. Humorous hashtags will probably take off, and clever memes may circulate for years, but healing, now that's serious business. So here's to navigating these digital nooks of vulnerability, and maybe, just maybe, finding genuine solutions wrapped in analogies, emojis, and a few laughs along the way. Then again, there's nothing quite like returning to good old face-to-face interactions, but for now, navigating recovery in the digital age feels like the most relatable sitcom we didn't know we needed. And as we tiptoe through the world of hashtags and emojis, we can at least hope for a bright future, tacked up with a side of laughter even in recovery. Let's just say it's one chaotic, comedic corner of evolution worth keeping an eye on. The thrilling world of prescription painkillers emerges. The public thirst for both relief and danger turns reality on its head. It's a pharmacy party gone awry, where prescriptions write themselves so dangerously that doctors are left questioning who is writing the script. As we unravel the complexities of dependency, prepare to cope with how this impacts lives in fantastically absurd ways. First off, welcome to the bizarre buffet of pharmaceuticals, where one size fits all doesn't seem to apply to anything except for the number of side effects. Picture this. A patient stumbles into their physician's office looking for a solution to a toothache. Instead of the usual recommendations like a good dental visit or some home remedies involving cloves and questionable herbal remedies, the doctor hands them a script for opioids that could take down a rhinoceros. Here you go, you'll feel better in no time. Little do they know, this seemingly innocent prescription comes with not just a chance of relief, but an entire buffet of cascading consequences that often rate lower than the chicken lunch special at a diner. Now, let's just take a moment to picture the average pharmacy, where neatly organised shelves parade labels promising miracles: pain relief, blissful sleep, stress reduction. One has to wonder, how did we get here? It all began when doctors, caught between a patient in pain and a pharmaceutical rep in a sharp suit, learned to prescribe medications like they were handing out candy at a parade. Everyone's getting a piece, and nobody's important, until suddenly they were dealing with a full-blown sugar crash. We've got to admit the marketing geniuses behind these medications deserve a round of applause for their stunning creativity. Who wouldn't be tempted by phrases like maximum relief or non-addictive? But as we know, they didn't include the disclaimer that it's only non-addictive up until the point that it is. So many unsuspecting folks have walked away from that pharmacy clutching their shiny new bottles, blissfully unaware that what they'd really unwrapped was a subscription to a whole new set of problems. And speaking of problems, enter the world of addiction, a term that only begins to scratch the surface. Picture our hapless protagonist, let's call him Joe. Joe starts off treating his shoulder pain with his doctor's generous prescriptions, feeling fantastic with every pill, until one day he realises his shoulder feels fine, but now he's a twitching mess without his morning dose. Hey Joe, plot twist. You just became a character in a sad comedy about addiction. By the time he faces this realisation, he's submerged in a sea of complications. Every appointment feels more like a dodgeball tournament, and forget about his social life. Nothing screams fun like bearing your soul to yet another support group, doesn't it? Through this comedic landscape, we observe the tangled web involving pharmaceutical companies marketing to doctors like they're a high school prom crasher. Sales reps float into offices arms full of samples, while physicians struggle between wanting to help and being lured into a game show where everybody's a winner, until they're not. As if that wasn't enough, let's take a moment to appreciate how doctors today are operating under the uninvited pressure of those glossy advertisements. With billboards towering over us like silent judges, "This will cure you," while in reality it's merely a sneeze away from becoming a double dare challenge in a sitcom. Eventually, this high-stakes drama leaves families in bewildered chaos. Loved ones watch the comedy of errors unfold as someone they know spirals, falling deeper into the cycle of dependency. Siblings undergo therapy to learn to cope with their once doting brother, now acting more like a haunted ghost of his former self. It's a tragic ballet that nobody wanted to join, yet they end up pirouetting around the question, how did it come to this? As we step back to examine this labyrinth, a collective sigh of relief escapes from us as we realise the time may finally be upon us for a more comprehensive approach to handling pain management. enter harm reduction strategies and alternatives, aiming to break the cycle and promote understanding. Researchers are fervently exploring holistic options. Acupuncture boils down to being a fancy term for "please don't stab me with that." And yoga, despite looking like a group of contortionists fighting for their lives, establishes a sense of community. The call for better education and awareness regarding the slippery eel of pain medication brings hope, accompanied by a hint of humour, a realisation that sometimes life imitates art, even when the art is downright absurd. In this crazy scene, we find ourselves on the precipice of change, a chance to rewrite the future of pharmaceutical prescriptions while, hopefully, keeping the comedy routine of modern medicine at its comedic best. So hang tight, folks. This circus isn't over yet, and we're bound to uncover even more absurdities in the road ahead. The struggle for balance continues, and to quote a famous philosopher, who said laughter isn't the best medicine? Because let's face it, we might need a good chuckle or two as we march on into the uncertain world of pharmaceuticals. Cue legislative change. Governments awaken from slumber, stumbling to put proposals in motion for desperately needed policy reform. Can the playing field be levelled? Once homogeneous minds split the air with fresh ideas. But will they balance the scales while eluding the comically chaotic backlash from narrow-minded foes? Comedy meets determination, and you can't help but chuckle while holding your breath. Picture politicians marching into meetings wearing their best suits, as if they're going to negotiate world peace, only to end up bickering over whose idea of compassionate care actually means slipping a pill under a lose or dead hamster. As the opioid crisis stretched its tendrils further into society, the media began to shine a blaring spotlight on the issue. Talk shows became battlegrounds of opinions, with guests alternating between impassioned pleas and finger-pointing. You may find yourself sitting on your couch, popcorn in hand, thinking, wow, this should really come with a laugh track. In it all, a shocking realisation emerged. People actually want solutions to this crisis, rather than just the standard "don't do drugs, kids" speech which, let's be honest, gets no one anywhere. In came policymakers, attempting to sharpen their pencils for a new chapter of thoughtful legislation. The irony was rich, as many had hopped onto the bandwagon, realising their original ships had sailed, leaving behind a wake of deluded misunderstanding. Proposals line the halls like holiday decorations, some bright and hopeful, some twisted and just plain ugly. Who knew legislation could come with such a rich tapestry of questionable wisdom? Federal and state governments began rolling out packages of comprehensive reforms that would involve everything from expanding rehabilitation programs to establishing safe consumption spaces where folks could partake without fear of immediate prosecution. Methinks that sounds delightful, right? Because nothing says we care like housing junkies in a chic area while a barista brews lattes next to them. Look out, trendy hipster cafes. What was once a scene from a dystopian film might become just another afternoon experience. Can you feel the irony here? Meanwhile, communities rallied behind grassroots movements aimed at changing the narrative around addiction. Unfortunately, this also meant a couple of well-meaning neighbours who thought they could remedy the situation with homemade herbal remedy recipes that they claim worked wonders. Just what every recovering addict needs, a dab of lavender oil and some questionable advice from Gary, the friendly neighbourhood conspiracy theorist. If only life's complexities could be solved with an essential oil. Aromatherapy cures the soul, my friends. Just ask the mint leaves, said no health professional ever. Most laughable were the public forums, those brilliantly chaotic gatherings where ideas met reality in a kaleidoscope of human emotions. There were parents weeping, former addicts passionately advocating for harm reduction, and that one guy in the back yelling about the golden age of what he believed was some mythical world where people shared crack pipes and trained unicorns. The dialogue buzzed like a beehive while the tension simmered, like a reality TV showdown, but with the stakes a whole lot higher and no dramatic music to ease the absurdity. As some proposed policies emerged, proponents and opponents faced off like heavyweight boxers, each trade of harsh words swinging with comically elaborate metaphors. Who knew it was possible to argue about something so serious while cracking visceral jokes? If we're handing out needles, should we offer classes on knitting? Became a library of one-liners that started to surface, leaving people both laughing and scratching their heads. In the midst of these whirlwinds, change began to happen, though slow and grimaced, like trying to peel a stubborn banana. People were finding a common language in a fight against misconceptions. Don't just shove someone into detox, screamed an activist with passion, and maybe just a hint of caffeine. And surprise! The out-of-touch legislative elite actually perked up. It turns out that constituents expecting innovation were onto something. The road toward reform wasn't smooth, more like navigating a minefield while blindfolded, but with each bounce back from adversity, ideas solidified. More comprehensive treatment facilities opened, communities banded together to provide support and education, and a glimmering sense of hope began to seep through the darkness. While the complexities of a past riddled with catastrophic failures haunted policymakers like persistent hangovers, it was those humorous attempts at sincere change that eventually solidified new initiatives. With every legislative proposal, you couldn't help but think, progress means a zigzag. The mantra may have shifted from don't do drugs to embracing the complexities of addiction itself, asking the uncomfortable question, how do we best support those entangled in this web? As absurdity merged with earnestness, perhaps, finally, we may see some light at the end of the tunnel, as long as it doesn't turn out to be the headlights of an approaching train. Drawing from this dizzying kaleidoscope of humanity's dark past, we're faced with the million-dollar question. What have we truly learned? Should we laugh, cry, or hide under a blanket? The answer, perhaps, is a bit of all three. A debate worth airing, analysing, and maybe roasting a little, as we attempt to understand how history can reform the future without repeating itself. In this bustling anecdote of human misadventure, where we claim to learn from the painful lessons of addiction, the irony is thick enough to cut with a knife, or perhaps a very dull butter knife, the kind used by the standard issue inmates in our imaginary edifice of folly. Let's start by addressing the rash of curious optimism that seems to accompany every novel solution to our addiction woes. In a society hell-bent on eradicating dependency, we often resort to flashy marketing campaigns that proclaim, "We have a plan." But promise me this, never trust anything that comes wrapped in an overly polished brochure. Would you trust a shampoo that promised to make you smell like euphoric sunshine, while it actually just left your hair a greasy gelato-scented mess? Absolutely not. The same skepticism can apply to addiction treatments. What's shiny on the surface often conceals inner chaos waiting to spring forth like a jack-in-the-box set loose at a toddler's birthday party. One must ponder if we are genuinely equipped to tackle the sensitive layers of addiction, or if we continue to approach it with all the nuance of a sledgehammer. Spoiler alert, using a sledgehammer to fix a watch never quite works out well. Who could forget the early 20th century's inclination to treat heroin like oversweetened candy? Unsurprisingly, here we are today, grappling with the side effects of those misconceived, ungoverned elevensies. Perhaps modern medicine still serves remnants of that same ambitious naivety, entwined in our protocols as we strive for silver bullets that never quite hit the mark. Will we attempt another bold leap into the chasm of complacency? Historical figures stroll down the path of denial. confidently discarding fundamental principles of compassion for sterile approaches centered mainly on punishment rather than healing. What have we learned from that? We learned that locking people away and tossing the keys into a bottomless pit is not a sound strategy, unless the goal is merely to watch society spiral into a whirlpool of despair. Meanwhile, treatment facilities commence under stringent restrictions and insufficient resources, all while our collective shoulders sag under the weight of an undeniable irony. Criminalizing addiction doesn't extinguish it. It only shuffles it to another room in the house, preferably one with less ventilation and no visible light. In our mesmerizing hindsight, it might be illuminating to consider the role of humanity in addiction recovery. Have we embraced the notion that not every person's journey is a straight path towards flawless redemption? Often, history has portrayed addiction as a dramatic fall from grace, a theatrical storytelling of an individual who slipped on the proverbial banana peel, landing face first in the realm of desperation. Reality, however, is often a grander, gentler continuum, the kind of experience where one may trip, stumble, then take a few steps back, all while considering whether it's actually worth tying their shoes at all. This metaphorical dance reminds us that recovery is elusive. It doesn't fit neatly into a heroic narrative. And let's not forget how history has shown us the beautiful power of community in addressing addiction. Have we only begun to scratch the surface of understanding that connection becomes a lifeline, and solidarity can trump isolation? Imagine a world where people gather not under the dark cloak of shame, but where true support emerges, emanating warmth like a cozy blanket that fits just right. As opposed to that itchy wool sweater Grandma knit you for Christmas that somehow shrank 3 sizes and multiplied your discomfort. As we dive into the future, perhaps we could allow history to be our teacher, albeit a quirky, raucous one who sometimes trips over its shoelaces mid-lecture, encouraging those in the throes of addiction to seek help instead of debilitating shame, crafting policies based on empathy rather than punitive measures, and recognizing the multifaceted nature of the human experience could foster a more sustainable approach. The echoes of history, with its relentless surprises and tantalizing blunders, guide us toward a future where freedom, healing, and connection can blossom, undeterred by ignorance or prejudice. After all, we've come a long way from the days of treating addiction as though it were a mere side quest in the video game of life. Time to level up with humility, compassion, and a slightly less judgmental approach, whilst fully understanding that the journey ahead remains as sinuous as the rivers of time itself. Perhaps we're ready to embrace the marvellously messy challenge of healing together. What about tomorrow? With innovation on our doorstep, the last chapter of this saga beckons analysis. Options emerge, substitutes, treatments, and comprehensive programs. It's a whirlwind of excitement intertwined with the burdens of distrust. Can we really embrace innovation, or will it be swept aside by old tricks of the trade? Cue suspenseful lightning strike moments. First, let's talk about those substitutes, shall we? Imagine a world where instead of facing the grim realities of heroin addiction, individuals could exchange their dosage for something less, life-disrupting. Enter methadone, an opiate that's been hailed as a miracle by some and questioned by others at dinner parties everywhere. Originally developed as a painkiller during World War II, methadone was like that reliable friend who's always down for a sad movie marathon, but never quite realises how often he brings his ex along for the ride. Yes, it works for some, but for others, it presents a whole new Pandora's box of complications, namely, tolerating the side effects and potential for dependency, leaving you feeling like the universe handed you nothing but a long-toothed joke. Next, we have buprenorphine, That spunky little fellow dancing on the line between detox aid and potential new addiction. This one's not just a pretty face. It works by binding to the same receptors as heroin, but with a twist. Like a stale piece of cake masquerading as a gourmet dessert. It's safer for long-term use, but it also comes with its own set of quirks and challenges. Maybe it's like the alternative music version of addiction treatment. Beloved by many, but still under scrutiny and sometimes misunderstood by the mainstream populace. A little too under the radar for the untrained ear. Will it ever play in the big leagues, or will it remain the hidden gem that only hipsters and specialists appreciate? Moving on, we can't ignore the rising stars of recovery, comprehensive treatment programs. Cue the dramatic drum roll as these systems aim to address the whole person instead of just the symptoms. Imagine a cozy retreat where self-care goes hand in hand with clinical support, yoga mats await, and mindful meditation reigns supreme. Throw in a dash of group therapy and voila! You have a recipe for change that feels less like a medical procedure and more like a cozy weekend getaway. But here's the catch. Just like a yoga retreat, these programs can come with a hefty price tag. It raises the question, does a buttery smooth experience make for a sustainable solution, or do we keep returning to the hard realities of heroin? And speaking of returning, let's not forget about the brave new world of harm reduction methods. These initiatives are like that reliable pal who always has a backup plan when the party goes south. Needle exchange programs, safe injection sites, and supervised consumption facilities. Could they really be our best bet for reducing the harms associated with drug use? It sounds promising, yet we're hit with our own skepticism. Will politicians jump on this bandwagon, or are they more inclined to wave dissension flags and question the moral integrity of such approaches? Sometimes it feels like watching a reality show where the contestants are all tasked with building a house, and half of them are using duct tape and sheer willpower, while the other half are debating the importance of the carpet choice. Additionally, let's throw some technology into the mix, because why not? Researchers and developers are concocting innovative solutions with the potential to disrupt the heroin epidemic further. There's talk of virtual reality addiction treatment, which could convert recovery sessions into intriguing tech-driven experiences. Imagine walking through a therapeutic landscape of inner peace, while simultaneously battling cartoonish heroin monsters. It's like Pokemon Go, but aimed directly at the heart of addiction. Will it work? It's tempting, sure. But then again, will users end up just hunting for cute virtual critters instead of coming closer to recovery? Sometimes it's like trying to figure out what candy to take when you've just won the jackpot at the candy store. Overwhelming choices and very sticky consequences. Thus, we stand at the doorway to change, a world of possibilities unfolding in front of us like a buffet where some hope to embrace progress while others throw their hands up in despair. As history rolls onward, we're left to ponder. Can we transform this saga of addiction into a story of triumph and hope? Or will we simply spin in circles until the next big crisis rears its head? With each innovation, we must balance excitement with caution, and whether it's substances, treatment options, or societal views, we find ourselves stepping carefully through the layers of complexity, armed with humour, skepticism, and that stubborn sense of hope. So here's to the future. May it be less heroin-induced heartbreak and more laughter and resilience. Hopefully, potluck of progress that we can all share in together. What's art without a measure of chaos? Creatives dive into the dark pandemonium of addiction that brings forth tragic masterpieces. How many portraits have painted the shades of despair? As we explore the uplifting alongside the horrific, let's acknowledge how many artists use pain as fuel, where heroin joins hands with pure inspiration, igniting fires of creativity. Imagine being a painter, your brush dipped in anguish, and your canvases splattered with the vivid hues of addiction. There's a bizarre poetry that accompanies the muse of heroin, and countless artists became entangled in this seductive embrace. Like moths to a flame, they found themselves lured into a world where creative brilliance and destructive habits intertwined in a dazzling dance. One minute they were painting clouds with silver linings. The next, they were embracing darkness so profound it could drown a city. Think of the iconic works of artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Vincent van Gogh, who captured the raw, often chaotic essence of their emotional landscapes, some soaked in the kerosene of addiction. Basquiat's graffiti-infused canvases exude a frenzied energy, teetering on the edge of madness. Did he find inspiration while lurking in the shadows of a drug-fueled night, pen in one hand and needle in the other? It's a haunting thought. Monumental art delivered through the lens of a man wrestling with a substance that would ultimately claim him. And then there's the vibrant yet somber strokes of Van Gogh's masterpieces, a man who bled his emotions onto the canvas. Starry Night captivates with its swirling cosmos, but let's not overlook the undercurrent of tumult that fueled those strokes. It's commonly believed that his battles with mental illness were compounded by his dependence on absinthe, and while not quite heroin, it's a rabbit hole of similar behaviour. Art can sometimes stem from the most regrettable of decisions, something akin to dousing oneself in fuel and lighting a match. And while addiction isn't a strict prerequisite for creativity, it seems that in many cases it acts as a potent catalyst. Ask any accomplished artist, and they might casually joke about needing a little liquid inspiration. It's as if a creative bone will lean on addiction like a crutch, a warped partnership that creates beauty in the chaos of despair. You might wonder if one poignant moment of pain, one crushing experience, became the gatekeeper for artistic genius, a muscled force pushing beyond boundaries to deliver the complexities of life, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Cue those glitzy gallery openings where every painting is a mirror reflecting personal battle, life lived through the jagged edges of a drug-fueled haze. Imagine sipping wine amidst critiques of art while knowing that behind every brushstroke lies a human soul woven with struggle. It's like whispering secrets about the artist standing just a few feet away as the audience admires their latest struggle, completely unaware of the pain that went into its creation. Ah, yes, the anguish of the artist. It's palpable. But is it? Or are we witnessing just a nervous twitch masked by creative flair? Throughout history, the connection between art and addiction has sparked debate. The question lingers, is this creative angst a beautiful revelation or a destructive cycle? Perhaps it's both. As we stir our cups filled with the irony of admiration and horror, we're left pondering the costs of glorifying the toxic muse. The tragic shadow that addiction casts can easily eclipse the artist's light, leaving behind a shell that lingers long after the brush has dried. And let's not neglect the intricate role this dynamic plays in the wider cultural landscape. Society seems to romanticize the tortured artist trope, as if to say, we love your paintings, but only if there's a hint of suffering in your backstory. Cue galleries bursting with whispers of substance abuse as a norm, and artists clinging to their vices even as they navigate their own dismantled lives. It becomes an addiction in itself, an insatiable need for validation intertwined with an undercurrent of despair. But maybe, just maybe, through the haze, we can find a way forward. If art is to capture the full breadth of human experience, it must incorporate stories of recovery alongside the tales of vexation. As we edge closer to acknowledging the destructive nature of heroin and its ties to artistry, there lies the potential for a new narrative, one that disrupts the cycle and champions those who rise from their struggles, proving that perhaps the real art is the resilience that fuels the brush, not the addiction that once wielded it. So, the next time you find yourself gazing at an art piece steeped in tragedy, remember the soul that endured behind it, teetering on the edge of darkness yet still creating. It is within the threads of sorrow, chaos and creativity that we discover the human spirit, a little ragged, perhaps even frayed at the edges, but endlessly persistent and ultimately gloriously resilient. Tune in to the recovery stories, the ones that shimmer with resilience. Voices advocating for awareness and support speak loudly amidst the clamour of addiction. Overcoming adversity entwines with humour, showing us that hope can rise like a phoenix, reminding us that the epic saga of human struggle often comes tinged with laughter, resilience, and reunion. Imagine a gathering of people gathered under the soft twinkling glow of fairy lights, sharing their stories of survival like a circle of campfire confessions, complete with uncomfortable laughter and maybe a few tears. It's here, in these sacred spaces, that the true magic of recovery unfolds, painting a picture of possibilities more vibrant than any drug's temporary glow. Have you ever attended a support group meeting? It's like stumbling into a live podcast recording where everyone has a wild story to tell, yet they're also still figuring it out day by day. I hit rock bottom, folks, one participant might declare, only to be greeted by chuckles and knowing nods. It's the kind of dark humour that's more comforting than a soft, well-loved quilt. Picture this. One person recounted how stealing a blender to make their morning smoothie turned into a police chase involving a unicycle and a very confused rooster. You can't make this stuff up. Yet through these strange, often hilarious tales emerges the heartbeat of recovery. A reminder that they're not alone because there's always someone else who's had their share of wild ideas. Now, while humour acts as a powerful bonding agent in these circles, the conversation quickly evolves into a supportive exchange of strategies. "What's your secret?" someone asks eagerly, eyes twinkling with curiosity and hope. Participants offer their own quirky remedies, meditations inspired by yoga instructors who wore far too much patchouli, or that one weird essential oil that smells like a blend of old lady perfume and a hit of menthol, supposedly good for everything from stress to skincare. Nothing quite like Tree Breathe Nurse 17 if you ask me, one might chuckle. Candour takes centre stage as everyone navigates the tangled web of sobriety, where laughter dances hand in hand with the serious business of healing. Delve deeper, and you'll find individuals forging connections that almost mimic familial bonds. It's like walking into a potluck dinner where everyone contributes their favourite don't get addicted dish. Recipes are swapped along with stories, and in this magical place you've got a dash of love, a sprinkle of kindness, and a hearty serving of encouragement, all served with a side remix of their favourite old songs that remind them they're still human, even if their past might look more chaotic than an explosion at a glitter factory. But let's not forget the people who are stationed on the front line, those addiction counsellors and social workers, armed not just with experience, but with the kind of courage that could rival superheroes. These brave souls keep it real, peppering every workshop with bits of wisdom while also telling their own tales of trials and tribulations. I might have gone toe-to-toe with addiction, but it finally hit me. I'm a heavyweight champion of recovery now, some might declare, sending the audience into peals of joy, as if each laugh were a weight lifted off their shoulders. Still, we arrive at serious moments too. Between the chuckles lie stories that reveal the raw truth about addiction's family traps or siblings' tears, showing the hurt that often lies beneath the laughter. Yet, even these tales weave in strength, presenting powerful testaments that inspire others to embrace change rather than fear it. Yeah, It was terrible, but I learned to love myself. And you know what? My dog loves me a little more now that I don't smell like a barroom floor, shares one participant, eliciting laughter and applause that echo like encouragement bouncing off the walls. In the end, these ego-dancing performances of recovery don't shy away from reality. They embrace it, much like that trusty old friend who could laugh with you, or at you, yet always has your back no matter what. Everyone remains acutely aware that sobriety is not just an endpoint, it's a perpetually wobbly tightrope walk, loaded with unexpected humour and connection. So, as we share in these victory stories, let's remember that every voice echoes with a truth that shines brighter than addiction itself, the resilience of humanity, the power of hope, and the magic of laughter. Because, at the end of the day, every day of recovery is an extraordinary story waiting to be experienced, savoured, and celebrated. Feel free to suggest any edits or specific areas you'd like to expand further. As we zoom out, the global landscape of heroin use unfolds, revealing a network of countries wrestling with their own unique challenges. It's a tragic comedy played out on stage for the world to see. Countries carry varying attitudes toward drug use, creating a unique tapestry of approaches wrapped in a quirky dance of cultural understanding. Consider the punchlines. Imagine a global conference where nations parry with solutions like they're boxing in a massive ring, except everyone's wearing oversized gloves and trying to figure out if "just say no" works better than "how about a nice cup of herbal tea?" In the United States, heroin is often portrayed as the ultimate villain, with dramatic headlines warning of doom and gloom, but depending on where you are, the narrative morphs wildly. Think of it like a nature documentary where the lion isn't necessarily king of the jungle. Somewhere else, it's the meerkat stealing the spotlight with its quirky antics. One moment it is all about harm reduction and rehabilitation. The next moon, it morphs into a terrifying tale of destruction and despair. It's as if addiction took centre stage in a Shakespearean drama. To use or to not use, that is the question, followed by a dramatic pause and a lengthy soliloquy on the merits of accessibility versus morality. Now, let's take a jaunt over to Europe for a moment, where the approach to heroin is a mix of pragmatism and let's give this a shot optimism. Harm reduction programs sprout up like daisies in springtime. In countries like Portugal, where heroin users are treated with compassion and care, the approaches almost feel like a cosy hug instead of a cold, hard slap. These sparkling examples show how decriminalisation combined with robust harm reduction can lead to a significant drop in overdose deaths and a surge in people seeking help. It's like discovering a secret garden of healing amidst the thorns. Suddenly, countries are viewing addiction not as a failure, but as a complex social issue that can be addressed with a sprinkle of understanding and a dash of community support. Let's not ignore the tales from Asia, where the war on drugs can take a dramatic turn worthy of an action movie. Picture this: authorities cracking down with military precision in places like the Philippines, where President Duterte declared war on drugs with all the subtleness of a medieval siege. "Clear the streets," he seems to roar, with headlines that read like the latest blockbuster. The consequences, they're dire. As the anti-drug campaign uncovers layers of deep-seated addiction issues, it's not just the drug dealers being targeted, but countless lives are ruined in the crossfire. And like any good comedy of errors, the dark humour shows itself as politicians must grapple with the repercussions and the very real sorrow left in the wake of their fierce tactics. Now back to our friends in Afghanistan. Heroin production thrives there, like a thriving but unwanted industry, reaching markets far and wide while hiding behind a curtain of political instability. Farmers grow poppy for a living, and the world is left grappling with the conundrum: how do we tackle a multi-billion-dollar industry that feeds countless people but destroys lives globally. Discussions arise with fervour on how to replace those crops with alternatives, yet the solution seems just out of reach, like a mirage in the desert with no oasis in sight. The irony thickens as governments debate action plans while folks on the ground grapple with everyday survival. After all, who's thinking about crop rotation when you're just trying to feed your family? As we journey through Asia, we encounter global dialogues taking place in the precipitous mountains of Bhutan or the tranquil fields of Thailand, where discussions on alternative livelihoods twine with cultural traditions. The proverbial needle swings as local communities try striking a balance between entrenched practices and the potential pitfalls of modernity. Who'd have thought recovery might require communing with a monk and meditative herbs wrapped in a fabric of tradition? Because in some countries the solution might just be about healing both body and spirit, an idea that's filled with hope. And as the world continues this quirky dance with heroin, let's hover above and gain perspective. Perhaps the key to bridging these cultural divides lies in conversation, understanding, and humour, laughing together over the absurdities of it all, while also recognising the gravity that the subject carries. Yes, heroin remains a global conundrum, but as nations engage in the delicate balancing act, perspectives shift with every conversation and every attempt to get it right. So as we step back from our global tour, we can be buoyed by the idea that amidst the dark storylines, resilience thrives. Whether it's through harm reduction initiatives, compassionate care, or cultural consciousness, humanity keeps tumbling forward, unearth the capacity for hope, even in the most tangled web of sobriety and addiction. Perhaps the final punchline is that as long as there are people dedicated to change, there is always a shot at a brighter, healthier tomorrow. And finally, we end our journey exploring the road ahead, the narrative of a world struggling for balance amid an ongoing addiction crisis. The comedy of human existence manages to find a way, not with all the answers, but with inklings of understanding. The twists and turns may seem endless, but hope lingers on, hinting that a sense of community might just be the balm to heal. Let's look to the future and ask ourselves, what will the next chapter of this outlandish saga hold? Probably more meetings, rhyme schemes, and countless PowerPoint presentations, which, let's be honest, is not anyone's idea of a good time. Yet, within this bureaucratic circus, compassionate voices are rising, advocating for reforms that prioritise rehabilitation over punishment. There's a sense of resolution, not the high five and laughter type, but that gentle nod of solidarity shared among folks who have seen things a little too darkly. As governments grapple with substance abuse, it's like watching a toddler learn to ride a bike for the first time. Wobbly and unpredictable, they've often got training wheels made of outdated policies, swaying dangerously too close to the edges of an abyss. Should we just ban it? They ponder aloud, echoing the wise words of every misinformed uncle during holiday dinner discussions. But tension mounts as they realise evidence-based approaches are favoured over the fiery accusations that opiate users are sparking irreparable chaos. Instead of looming malevolence, the narrative shifts toward understanding the underlying conditions leading people into the emotional jaws of addiction. That's right. Thanks to the breezy magic of modern research, we're now aware that addressing trauma is key. Imagine hosting a neighbourhood potluck where every single dish represents the unique grievances of life, but only a handful are gluten-free. We're not saying gluten is the devil, but perhaps the underlying trauma could be likened to that pesky cousin who can never quite play nice. And yet, there's a victorious feeling creeping in as communities begin to come together, fostering conversations about mental health like they're announcing the revival of an ancient cult, minus the creepy chants and strange sacrifices, of course. And if you think that's all, think again. We've also got a cavalcade of supporting roles in the recovery narrative. Enter harm reduction strategies. Now don't roll your eyes at the term, it's just as glamorous as its name implies. Picture a marketplace filled with kindness, where people offer clean needles instead of judgment, all the while creating access to life-saving treatment without the hierarchically structured drama. It's akin to handing someone a first aid kit instead of a lecture while they're attempting to stitch up their own wounds. Call it community care with a side of empathy, as neighbours rally to create spaces free of shame. "We didn't know what we were doing," they cry. "Let's take this as a learning opportunity." Moreover, our friends in education have not been sitting idle. Schools and community centres now dabble in drug education with an emphasis on reality. Instead of "just say no" echoing as the battle cry, educators veer more towards discussions on coping strategies. Who knew that building emotional resilience could be such an engaging topic? Imagine children armed with tools to handle their feelings, rather than desperately trying to fit them into a box that's getting increasingly smaller. It's like giving them a power-up in the battle against the emotional troll lurking under their metaphorical bridges. What about the creative realm? Artists, authors and musicians alike have joined the fray to declutter the stigma-plaguing addiction and recovery narratives. They bring life to the complexities of human experience through their work, making the heaviness just a little more bearable. It's like someone turned on a light during a power outage, revealing that it's not just shadows that dance. The walls have tails too. In the world of art, addiction shifts from a bleak headline to a type of collective consciousness, aligning us within the struggle while weaving beautiful, sometimes hilarious tapestries of resilience and hope. Ultimately, as this humorous tragedy unfolds, let's meet the future with an open heart and a fierce determination to bridge the gaps in understanding. With community support, rising awareness, and a colourful array of initiatives, there's a spark igniting within the haze of addiction. Each shared laugh, each open dialogue, pulls us closer to the realisation that, in this wild ride called life, healing can be just as impactful as the tough stuff. So here's to navigating the long road ahead, not merely as individuals but as a collective thriving, to find balance in this beautiful, chaotic dance of humanity, where every step tells a story. After all, isn't that what this journey's all about?